Hi, I'm Dr. Frank Renito, Chief Scientist with the Institute for Digital Transformation. I want to welcome you to Digital Dialogue, where different industry experts discuss digital transformation topics and issues that are of concern to all businesses. Whether you are already a digital enterprise, or on your journey, or still trying to figure out what that all means, we know you'll find something here for you. Remember, as a LinkedIn Live session, this is your opportunity to interact with these experts. Post your comments and questions in chat for a full interactive experience. Welcome to Digital Dialogue.
It turns out I have been talking live to all of you with my mute button on. Welcome to Digital Dialogue. This one's going to get edited. Thanks, Frank, for letting me know. A friend of mine, one of our guests today, sent me a little quote about the word Ubuntu, which is a South African term, and it kind of means a person is a person through other persons. And so that is all about community. So we're going to talk a little bit today about distributed teams. Digital Dialogue's title today is The Work That Binds, Digital Augmentation of Human Communities. Thank you for your patience with my silence earlier. I'm looking forward to my guests.
Hello, Patty.
Hey there. Hello, Clemens and Rebecca. Rebecca Kirsten-Riesch and Clemens Reddick are friends of mine. We've already done a digital dialogue in the past. Why don't you two, starting with Rebecca, do a little introduction of yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Kirsten-Riesch, and I am the founder and CEO of 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗁. And 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗁 is an inclusive knowledge sharing platform. I'm happy to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, my name's Clemens Reddick. I run an organizational and management consultancy, and I teach leadership and organizational behavior at the University of Victoria.
And I'm Patty Blackstaff. I'm from Global Sway. We are a leadership development and governance consultancy that works with IT folks. So today's title, Digital Augmentation of Human Communities. I think we had talked earlier this week about what is a distributed organizational ecosystem, and I'm going to pick on Clemens first.
Okay, is there a question? Oh, is that the question? What is something?
Well, let's describe it.
Sure. So I'm sure it means something different for almost everyone. For me, what it means, or it's language that I use in trying to answer a question. And that question for me is, what is the nature of work and of organizations and communities when they are, in a word, scaled, when they're distributed across the globe? when they're distributed across time zones, when they're distributed geographically, and so on. What is that animal? What kinds of problems does it have? I'm increasingly asking, I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm increasingly asking questions about, is such a thing even legitimate? Like, should we even be scaling this idea of the global organization when we get past things like, whether they're valid or not, but things like the Dunbar number, that a human community may be limited to a number of around 150 people, given human neurological limitations, social norms and social practice and so on. So that's for me the question. It's just like that sort of the idea of the distributed community, the distributed organization is just a word we use in trying to get at, what is this thing when we have a multi-location organization or community?
Right. So for whom, what, why the work even exists. And I think, Rebecca, what would you say is some of our biggest challenges right now with distributed organizational ecosystems?
Ooh, top of the list, communication and the perception that it's occurring. I would say that is probably the greatest challenge of our time, regardless of the size of organization. It could be the three of us talking to each other, whether we're online or offline or in a private conversation. I think that when we can focus on the quality of our communication, regardless of the method, I think things get a lot better. And there's a lot of organizations that are doing that work, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work individually, and it's a lot of work as an organization, because all of us have not grown up in a world in which that is prioritized. And I think it is the single biggest challenge we have ahead of us.
I would agree. I think there's a lot to be said, though, for understanding that if we're going to continue trying to function in a distributed network the same way we do in a one-on-one closed network, we're going to have some trouble, right? We need to build some cadence around what that engagement looks like. We need to have an agreement on what the tools we use and the home base we have and the pieces that connect to us, because we don't have to be connected in person. In fact, all of you might be surprised. We are friends, the three of us, and I've never met these two in person. And so, and I think Clemens, you and I are going up over 12 years now, I think. I just stopped counting. And that's, I think, the biggest fallacy I keep hearing out there is that, you can't build culture with a distributed network, and I disagree. I really believe that if we can learn to accept and adopt asynchronous connecting and synchronous connecting and decide and make decisions around what that looks like, and then lay out our expectations a little bit more clearly with each other, communication can happen better.
Absolutely. Our Gen Z kids have been doing it their whole lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're bringing them in to our organizations, and they are beginning to wonder why we're not doing it, right, in organizations. I think that we also have to reinvent our idea or even renegotiate the idea of organizational structure. I think that's an important piece of, having an idea of what organizational structure looks like. It's almost what I think you called a non-structure when we're interconnected. Is that correct, Clemens?
Sure. I don't remember saying that, but I'll go with it.
I think you're brilliant, so go ahead. Yeah. So what would we do then? How do we engage ourselves in that conversation of community in a distributed system, with communication as one of our biggest challenges? Where do we start? Where does it start in an organization? If we're going to walk into an organization and say, we've got digital happening, where are we going to start with understanding how digital fits in and is augmenting our community? Anyone want to grab?
Sure. Yeah. For me, what I think it starts in two places simultaneously. It has to start at the unmediated human level. So really understanding, what is this animal that we are? How does it function? What are its needs? What are its capacities? And sort of re-invoking this idea of memory and getting away from things like evidence and more into stories. And by evidence, I mean sort of in the modern technocratic sense, but that perhaps that other form of evidence around stories and memory and intuition, expert intuition of knowing how we live our lives. So it's an exploration of all of that. And I think just that's mostly facilitated simply by slowing down and paying better attention to how we are individually, and then in small groups and communities and so on, and then collectively and globally. So I think that's piece of it. And the other piece of it is, I don't know what the right language is, but something around a greater or better level of honesty around what are the real challenges of the technology, in this case, the digital technology, in doing the work that we think it can do. So when we talk about, the fact that Patty, that you and I have been friends for, at least 12 years, and it's been entirely mediated digitally, right? So that's true. Yet on the other hand, we know that a lot of the research shows right now that digital communication leaves enormous gaps and holes. It creates enormous cognitive loads under certain conditions, because we never see much of the body below sort of, mid-chest. There's body language missing. This idea that two of you, plus I can see myself, which is weird. The human brain is simply not neurologically wired to communicate with these various parameters going on right now. And I feel like we poke at that, but then we kind of brush it to one side and to a degree minimize it and just kind of want to get on with business. And I think we need to stop doing that. And I think we need to slow down and really ask some of these questions around what are the realities of the technology and what are the realities of being human, and trying to understand how these two things fit together to answer this question.
I love that. Frank popped up a note that says, "Isn't all this culture?" A good portion of it is. Yeah, I would agree. When it comes to stories and memory, it's all about, the historical knowledge of what got us here, because oftentimes that leads to a better understanding of where we need to go and why we are trapped in some of the challenges we're trapped within. Yeah. Rebecca, I have, you said something at our last digital dialogue that I haven't let go. In fact, I've sent you messages saying I'm going to use it. And that is this idea of how we view technology is different across the organization as well. And sometimes that's generational, and that younger people are trying really hard to figure out why we're using clunky tools, and that we just don't make this more streamlined and easier. And some of us who grew up a long time ago and haven't been their age in a while, some of us, prefer to be in an office setting. We prefer to walk across the hall. I have been remote since 2008, so that's not a big thing. But what could we do to close that divide? How could we? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I think to not go too deep into it, but I really do believe that we are missing opportunities all the time to have conversations, particularly with the younger generations in our workforce, but not just the younger generations. I think, my parents' generation, some of whom are still in the workforce, have different perspectives as well. And I think across the board, whether we're talking about the generational differences in how we use technology, or just the generational differences in how we approach work, and what work means to us, those are conversations we can and should be having together. And I think it goes along with the way in which we think about, restructuring organizations or reorganizing the way we do work involves everyone. And so having those conversations across those generations and across those cultures is such an incredibly important part of, I think Clemens was the one who said, we've never, ever seen the world the way that it is today, right? We cannot rely on what we've already done and what we already know. We are charting new territory, and that has to be taken really seriously. And everybody's perspective, as much as is possible, needs to be considered in that, because we're missing so many opportunities. And I have a strong feelings about how we treat younger generations in our culture, in particular in North America. And I think, when you actually look at what adolescence is for, like the evolutionary purpose of adolescence is to go outside the box and shirk the status quo and do things differently and set sail for new shores and all of those things. So not to include that perspective at the table is a huge miss. And not to include all perspectives at the table is a huge miss, in my opinion. So I think as organizations, we shouldn't be creating those environments where I used to call this in my youth work days, the add youth and stir, kind of programming. It's like, no, we should be really meaningfully including these perspectives at the table, because they have as much to teach us, if not more, than we have to teach them about what the future of work could look like. And I think they bring a lot of valuable ideas to the table. So when we are having these conversations, and many of us aren't, we're just kind of plowing through, hoping for the best, working with what we've got. But those of us that are, everyone needs a seat at that table, because you're missing a huge opportunity for innovation by not involving all generations and all cultures.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that you brought it there, because that really was what that quote we started with is all about. A person is a person through other persons. And the idea of community is about a safe place for people to be able to be themselves, say what they think, challenge, and be able to help create something better, because that you won't innovate if you're stuck in Taylorism. It's going to be painful to try and create any kind of innovative or creative environment where you can respond to the massive changes that are coming right now, if you're going to be stuck in kind of an old management style that father knows best kind of an idea. There are 5 generations in the workforce. How do we communicate to them all? That's an interesting question, because I have a hard time with the generation conversation, because and I was saying this to someone on a phone call today. Yes, there are 5 generations, but the moment we start focusing on demograph instead of values, commonalities, and the human things that make us the same, the minute we try to message to people differently because we think they're different, we create the divide. We're shot before we even begin.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and there are some ways that you can engage in being able to understand shared missions and what it looks like for my values and your values. The reality is we've got 13-year-old entrepreneurs and we have 80-year-old entrepreneurs. They are sharing the same values right now. Right? So I think we need to look at it that way in the workforce as well, as long as
it's no different than culture, right? I mean, how many cultures are represented in our workforce? And so whether it's culture, whether it's age, gender, it doesn't matter. We are all human at the core. And so I think we cannot get caught up in, how do we speak to this generation or that generation, as much as we can't get caught up in how we speak differently to different cultures. Those things matter. But at the core, we are all human beings, and, we are all driven by the same things.
I agree. So how is the past different from what we need now? What are we looking at now in terms of managing the collective hybrid world that we're living in? Clemens, you want to pipe in on that one?
Yeah, I wonder, I wanted to comment on the thing of just sort of say my bit around the generational thing as well, because I basically agree. It goes back to the, it does tie into that earlier question around, the idea of the scaled or the expanded or the distributed organization at all, right? So, and one of my challenges with it, as I try to understand that in the context of things like, trying to unpack technocracy, trying to unpack colonialism, trying to unpack neoliberalism, and all those various forces that we're really asking some very hard questions about right now. And some of the writers that I'm just loving reading right now, this fellow named Jacques Ellul, who wrote sort of the definitive book on this in the 1950s called the Technical Society, and our own Canadian John Ralston Saul's work in a book called Voltaire's Bastards. They both drive at this idea that one of the ways that these destructive systems work is by creating categories, and that because they're all in the end serving efficiency and consumption, they can't function on the individual basis. They can only function on averages and masses. You need large numbers in order for any of this to work at all in those paradigms. So that's where I think we get into this, and I have no answers to this, but this is where I feel like we're pushing at the edges of things, trying to understand, yes, we need a collective something in some sense, yet we also need the respect for and the understanding of the individual as well. We are all human, yet we are all discretely and differently human in our own unique way, right? So trying to understand that incredibly messy, complex thing as we're trying to become effective managers of organizations I think that's a really important question. And this idea of, you mentioned it perfectly, trying to understand this matrix between demographics and psychographics, and trying to understand how we deal with each other in that way is incredibly important. So, and I think, in fact, that's sort of also the answer to the part of the question you asked, which is, at this juncture in history, where are we at right now? And I think where we're at is that I'm sensing we have reached the end of some kind of rubber band, and it's going to snap back. I think we are approaching as far as we can get in this consumerist, colonialist sort of, occupying things. I call it, in its ugliest form, it's parasitism, right? We are parasites, and we've done nothing to create a mutually reciprocal flow of value and whatever with each other and with the planet that we live on. And we've done nothing but take from it, right? So I think we've reached the end of that. And I think we're just starting to ask some questions at a very interesting time, where greater than any other time in history, with digital communications technology, and now with, the sudden sort of, for whatever reason, the sudden emergence, this burst of artificial intelligence, the whole AI thing, we have the capacity to do even more of what we did before than ever. And at the same time, we're asking questions like, well, whoa, wait a minute. Should we even be like, is this even a direction, a vector, or, an arc, a journey that we even want to be on anymore? So it's awesome that we have digital communication tools that allow us to communicate asynchronously and across time zones and geographies. But is that actually a good thing? Mm-hmm. Like, is that really what we should be doing, right? My question increasingly is, at what cost? I'm not sure we've done a very good job of really understanding what the costs might be.
I think there's some autonomy conversation I want to have with that when I hear you talk about that, because when I was talking with somebody I was working with, one of our clients, and they said they were really, really struggling because pre-pandemic, as a manager and a leader of a team, they were allowed to decide the cadence of the team, how often they met, where they sat, whether they remote or not remote, all this kind of stuff. Then the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden now all of that autonomy has been stripped. The organization has now stolen it from that manager and said, I am taking it back. We want you all back in the office. Mm-hmm. And I think you tapped on it in the beginning, where we need to really look at deep honesty, because I'm hearing in the back of my head, we've got another 5 years in this building, and by God, I'm going to get you back in here.
Right.
But what they're saying right, is, oh, we want more collaboration and more, more
Right,
connection.
right.
And yet we're more connected than we've ever been on the planet. And yet we are creating more and more and more division as we move forward. And now we have this added intelligence. So we've got the organizational intelligence, right? We've got our knowledge bases, we've got our historical business work, all of those pieces. But now we've got this intelligence. This intelligence is now augmenting the human inputs, the jobs, the displacement of jobs, all of those pieces of things. And I think that a big question that I am asking right now is, how do we take and create this organizational collective intelligence from, the artificial intelligence, the human intelligence, and how it merges together? And that's one I'm chasing, that I have no answers, but I know it's there, and we need to really take a long look and have a hard conversation. And really, it should be a conversation among the members of a team, not, we need to support that, but we need to actually talk about, what works best for us as a group to achieve the goals we have to achieve.
By the way, I just want to pause for a second here to acknowledge something. I think all three of us have now said at one point in the middle of what we said, I don't have the answer. Right? And I think...
So everyone's hanging up now.
I think that's important. Like, I just really want to acknowledge the presence of Edgar Schein in the room, right? Around humble conversations and true situational humility, which is understanding that together, we form the answers out of the conversation. We don't arrive into the conversation having the answers. And I think we needed to have done that 25 years ago, frankly, globally as leaders and in organizations. I think maybe we're finally there, where maybe some people are ready to show up and go, I don't know. I think I know what the problems are. I think I know how this feels. I don't know how to change it. Or at least I don't have the granular specifics on how to change it. So anyways, I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I think it's extremely important.
I'm glad you did, because it came up in our last conversation as well, the value of curiosity. And I think we talked at length about, and I think we did even on LinkedIn too, about, questions being the answer, right? That showing up, it's way more important to consider the questions we're asking than the answers we have or don't have.
Right. I would agree. And, it's funny, we have this opportunity of chasing our careers when we're young. And so as we move forward, we're told through performance reviews or other things that we have to be something different than that human that walked into the room. I don't know, I'm quite a bit older than you, Rebecca. And when I first entered the workforce in IT, I entered an organization that was primarily led by men. And there was one female mentor, and I went to her and asked her, like, do you have any advice? You've done really well for yourself. And she said, no, other than act like a man, speak like a man, dress like a man, be like a man. And it was like, I just looked at her and I said, no, I can't, that's not me. So how do we fix this? And so we push and push and push in our careers, and we're fighting to try and be credible. And so we take on these, I have to know everything personas. And when we feel like we have to know everything in the room, we don't open the door for those conversations. And so I think the first thing we need to do is know that we don't know what's coming down the pipe. We don't know how it's going to spin out. We have no idea, but we better start talking about it. Yeah.
We better start talking about it.
It's a challenge, though, to a collective that is unfamiliar, right? And so instead of talking about departments and organizations and using words like Clemens, you put out a wonderful post. If you haven't seen Clemens' post, go to his LinkedIn and search it on you know, the using the word organization as a neutrality to
Yes.
not take ownership almost of decisions that are being made.
Yeah.
And I think if we can look at what we do as community, possibly we can change that story. Because what do we do in community when we're in our neighborhoods, right? We're helping with the soccer team, we're helping with, you know, the community garden, we're doing, and I think if we can look at each other as community, perhaps that's a place to start. Yeah. AI. You brought it up. Let's talk about the elephant in the room.
Sure.
You take the tail, I'll take the foot.
Okay. So I'll take the tail because it's wagging the dog right now.
Yeah.
We don't know we as consumers being impacted by AI have no understanding of the data the models are built around. There's no transparency. And when there's no transparency, we are putting ourselves, walking right into the door of risk, and no one's telling us it's a risk. I think that's a piece that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I have a lot to say on this topic, being is that I am the CEO of a technology company that is specifically using AI to connect humans to humans.
Exactly.
Fancy that. And so it's a really interesting dynamic right now, whether I'm talking to customers or partners or investors or even our own team, people's perceptions about what AI is and isn't. And what the implications are or aren't. And of course, there are people who are extremely excited about the possibilities, and they should be. There's incredible possibilities there. And there's also people that are incredibly cautious, and they also should be, because there's a lot of danger there as well, especially if we don't learn from history and look at social media and, you know, some of the things we didn't see coming that really we could have seen coming if we had just looked a little bit closer and made some of these decisions around governance that we, you know, really should have made far earlier. And I think that that's coming up now in, you know, I can't have a conversation with an investor or a customer that isn't addressing that in working with our company. And so it's really changed the conversation entirely. And in our case, you know, we are genuinely using AI not to scrape the internet, but to match people to people in order to help actually extract some of that human context on all that content out there. And so our use of AI is entirely different than what people think it is and what they think it means. So it's a big one, and there's a big, deep topic here that can go for days. So I will only say that it is a topic that needs a lot of discussion and a lot of thought beyond what we could possibly cover in 20 minutes.
I agree. I do, though, want to just highlight just some simple things. You know, if you're using a bot that customers go to on your website, let the customer know it's not a human. Let them know it's a bot. Hi, my name is Charlie the bot. Let people know. That's all, right? So there is the leader that uses AI in a way that has respectful transparency for the consumer, and there is a leader that is not. And I think that making the choice to be the leader that does is a piece of conversation that leads into how do we stay on the possibility rather than the peril side. We stay on the possibility side through understanding that it's emergent, and that the more transparency, the better.
Yeah. We have a major responsibility to ask a lot more questions and think a lot more deeply, whether you're leading a company or, in education, whatever it may be. If AI is a part of your world, and it's a part of all of our worlds now, I think we need to be asking a lot more questions as consumers, not just, in industry.
Clemens, thoughts?
Not really. No, not on the AI thing. I mean, I really do think, just like when it feels a little bit of an echo, like when we were in the middle of the pandemic and everybody was telling us what was going to happen and what the risks were, what the benefits were. Well, there weren't a lot of benefits to that, but nonetheless, to try to kind of paint the landscape of what's going on. And already back then I said, no, there's no way we can know in the middle of something like this what's going on. We probably won't know for a decade or two what really happened, right? So I think to comment right now, other than to say transparency is good, I think probably more important than anything else like that, helping people understand. And as I do think about it out loud, there is one area that I do wish we could do better at around this. And it is an echo of the pandemic. And that is that I wish the technical and scientific communities took a basic course in communication, because we keep getting taken out by, the large corporate PR machines, the extremist conspiracy groups, like all these organizations. They're simply drowning, a thoughtful argument out, and we're not able to get that voice out there. So what I'm hoping is, because I even read that document that went around, where hundreds and hundreds of these big tech CEOs all signed this thing, all saying, the sky is falling and we need to be more careful. And as I'd gone to that, I'd hoped for something in terms of how it was positioned, that it would be illuminating, that would increase, it would open the windows wider, it would increase. And I read it and went, this is not helpful. Okay, it's nice that all these people are concerned, but there's nothing in this that moves the conversation forward in this particular moment. And I know that's not its function necessarily, but that's the one thing I would wish for in this conversation, is that somehow we bring better stories, better analogies, better metaphors, certainly greater transparency, to try to lift up the understanding and to try to arrive at a common perspective in all of this.
Rebecca, do you have some final thoughts that you'd like to share about what we barely touched on today?
I think I would love to share that. I think there are some thoughtful conversations happening. Center for Humane Technology is a great resource. There are thoughtful conversations happening around AI and many other topics, but I do think that it's really important for all of us to consider the implications, because I think, like Clemens said, we're not going to know for many, many years to come what the implications of the choices we're making today are. But I think we can learn from very recent history that we should all be paying a lot closer attention and being a part of those decisions and learning what we can.
Awesome. I think that for me, my final thoughts are, we need to start looking at everything as a system within a system within a system within a system. If we can look at our organizations as systems, if we can understand that everything we are doing is an emergent process, that we are in continual experimentation, that by experimenting we have to be thoughtful about that, and we need to open up the door and to be thoughtful, what Rebecca mentioned about bringing, all of the generations to the table, and what Clemens mentioned about, the human element needs to be a consideration at the individual level as well, and how they contribute to that system and where we fit and where we're interconnected. I believe that the humans within organizations are screaming for more connections, screaming to share their ideas and thoughts and brilliance across the organization, and that by perhaps at least making the invite, we can take one step closer to organizational health and wellness.
Yeah. Thank you for dropping in the systems thing. I'll just turn to what I'm going to say. Read your damn Donella Meadows. Read your Introduction to Systems. Like, just get that under your belt if you're going to tackle this kind. So thank you for calling out that we need to understand, this is not random. There are things we can understand much better by looking at this more appropriately. So,
yeah, for the questions we're asking that are dumb questions are, is it in office or out of office? Do we do layoffs or don't do layoffs? Do we keep the strategy at the exec level? Do we, those are silly questions, because what we're doing is we're stopping the ball from rolling before it even gets started. And the question isn't, should we be in or out of office? It's, how do we work? What do we do to work best? What is our best, way forward? And that really belongs in autonomous pockets of your organization. Some will require more in-house collaboration. Some won't.
Well said, Patty. And I think certainly from my perspective, if I was to leave us with anything, it would really be that I think that the biggest question we need to be asking is how we are redefining not just our organizations, but the employer-employee relationship and the levels in our organizations. I think redefining those relationships and what they mean is going to be critical for all these other conversations about compensation and do we work remotely and who's in charge and who makes decisions and should be involved in strategy, and all these other big questions ultimately stem from that. I think we need to redefine that relationship. And I think we need to focus on trust and autonomy and connection and a lot of the things we talked about today in redefining that relationship. I'm
even going to push the envelope a little further. I honestly think we need to reinvent it.
Oh, I like that better than I like it. I like what you said better than mine.
I liked it well, but I'd like to throw the old one away because it's not working.
Yeah, I agree. We need to really, the context, when we talk about, we need to look at the larger context. I often go, we're still not looking at a large enough context. There's a context outside the context we're looking at right now. We're not looking at it. And it is around, what is our relationship with value creation? For whom are we creating value? What are the costs of creating that value to the humans and to the planet? And then what is the function of work, of an individual showing up to work and all of that? And then within that, asking ourselves, if digital technologies they augment that ability, then we need to ask, what is it exactly they're augmenting? And is it the best way to do it? So I think it's really going all the way back, because you're right. I think the reason we used to do things, at least for the last, probably since the Industrial Revolution, which is to maximize shareholder value and to extract value from the earth and from each other and, from the workforce and Taylorism and all the rest of it, to shifting back into creating value and doing so with a really deep humility and a really deep awareness of the costs of what we're doing, to make sure that we're back to a systems. I love my Donella Meadows. She's just that book is just her thinking's awesome. That in the end, that the system needs to be balanced. We need to balance the inflows, the outflows. We need to understand that we can't just keep sucking out of it all the time. So that's, the big picture. And then within that, yes, once we've decided what kind of work we want to do and what that looks like, then how are we going to do it as people? And then how do the digital tools, whether it's AI or communication tools, whatever, how do they fit into that to augment that ability?
Right. Organizational purpose, the humans within, and technology last. I love that. What a wonderful way to frame that. Thank you very much. All of us are on LinkedIn. You'll find Rebecca Clemens and I all there. If you want to look us up, feel free to connect. I would like to thank you two so much for your time once again. And I would like to thank the Institute for Digital Transformation for allowing me to just open up the doors on their platform and have fun with my friends. So thank you for all the viewers who showed up for us today. We really appreciate you, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining our digital dialogue. Be sure to join our next digital dialogue on the first and third Tuesdays of every month.